This is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and today is Wednesday, September 22nd. Over the past few months, I've received a number of contacts from people, from Catholics, planning to start or organize private schools, and they've contacted me seeking some consultation or input, knowing of my work in curriculum research and publishing. And as these contacts continue to increase in number, I thought it would be time, or it would be a good time for me to begin talking about the question of schooling, because I've been immersed in this for 25 years now. I've worked in private schools, I've worked in curriculum research and development, I've started and run private schools, and when I look at people talking about starting schools, what I see is Catholics with good intentions hoping to create a solution for kids in their community. But what we see is that they really have no solution to the problems that already exist in modern schools, or that already existed in schools and caused those schools to close or fail. They simply seem to think that by doing it again, or having them in charge as they do the same things, that the results will be different. What we almost always see is a group of Catholic adults planning to start an independent school. It's going to be a K-12 school, and what's going to be different about it is that it has a quote-unquote classical curriculum, which we'll talk about in a bit, or it's associated with a certain movement within the church, like it's associated with an Anglican ordinariate community, or it's associated with a traditional Latin Mass community. And because of these things, the school is going to be different and successful when so many other schools have failed. And the reality is that these cultural details are not going to overcome the fundamental flaw of the K-12 school model, which is ultimately going to undermine and bring the school down. And I'd like to talk about why that is and explain why, for private schools to work, especially in 2021 and beyond, the K-12 model is going to have to be abandoned by private schools. As I said, we're living in 2021. Last year, we watched as a pandemic shut down the schools, and the entire nation moved from indoor, on-location schooling to remote learning. An entire nation was able to flip a switch and move to remote learning. The reason is because the technology and the resources are already in place for remote learning. Everyone who works in computers and website development and technology knows that the resources are already in place and available. The schools, the brick and mortar schools exist Usually because children need to be cared for while parents work. They need a place to go. And the school is really a giant childcare institution. The academic work does not need to take place in a school. Things like sports and other extracurricular activities are not dependent on school. What the essence of a school in 2021 is really childcare. It's no longer an academic center. It's no longer a center for learning. It's no longer a cultural focal point. It's no longer where you go to play on the sports team. It's a childcare institution. That's the essential nature and mission of a brick and mortar school in 2021. And that's why schools are going to continue to be necessary, because parents need to work. That too is changing, as we also saw last year how many businesses could operate remotely, working from home. I recently listened to a talk by the CEO of HubSpot, which is a marketing company, and he said the future of business is going to consist of Zoom meetings and Slack, which is a communications software program. The technology and the resources are already in place. It's just a matter of time as people realize more and more what's possible by working and studying remotely, making prudent use of the available technology. So more and more parents are going to be able to work from home, and as soon as that begins to happen, the demand for schooling is going to decrease over time. Remote learning is going to become more and more the focus of education, and what's good about that is that elite teachers are going to be able to directly instruct more and more children, and all of the unskilled, incompetent, unqualified people who we call teachers, who have just been needed to fill positions in schools that are designed to be dependent on more teachers than they can possibly find, their jobs will be eliminated. And those so-called teachers will no longer be involved in the work of education. So it's going to improve the quality of instruction over time by allowing the best teachers to reach the greatest number of students. So when we start talking about a school, starting a school in 2021, we really need to be careful and make sure that we spend time thinking through the issues. We can't just think back to what we did 20 years ago, what we experienced in school, and try to reproduce that or create a new version of a school, when the reason why there's a need for a school in the first place is likely because someone already failed to do what we intend to start. On the road that leads from our farm into town, there's one spot where 3 roads come together and there's a blinking light there, and right at that intersection there's this old gas station. And over the past 15 years, there have probably been 10 different owners of this gas station. And every time a new owner arrives, they're announcing the grand opening under new management, new owners, this and that. And we laugh because the business plan is not going to work for this small gas station because 3 miles up the road is the local supermarket, and right across the street from the supermarket is a giant gas station, convenience store, and everyone goes to that gas station. No one is going to stop at this small gas station in an intersection of 3 different roads where cars are flying through and it's difficult to get in and out. Yet every new owner imagines that this time it's going to be different. And they continue just doing the same thing over and over and over with some new gimmick, some new twist. And within a year, maybe 2 years, the for sale signs are back up and they're gone. Assuming that a business will succeed because I'm in charge is arrogance. And assuming that failing school models are going to be successful because me and my friends are going to be the ones in charge is just arrogant. There's no question that one group of people or even one individual may be much more talented, much wiser than another group or another individual. But the fundamental flaws of the K-12 model of schooling are so great that no private school, especially a small private school, especially a small private school starting in 2021, is going to overcome those flaws. Let's talk about those flaws. First of all, school groups start by talking about how they're going to start a new classical K-12 school. Well, right off the bat, there has never in history been a K-12 classical school. And I'm not talking about fake Dorothy Sayers classical, which has nothing to do with classical education. I'm talking about real classical education. If we go back and ask, where does the K-12 school model come from? The answer is, it's the public school system. It was invented in the 1850s, in the midst of the Industrial Revolution. It was invented to create something like an assembly line model for education, as this whole idea of efficiency and industrial production was developing in the market and in business. The school was intended to be sort of the nursery or the seminary where children were sent and prepared for this industrial system that they were then going to move into and work in. They needed to be trained for the assembly line, for the factory, for the manufacturing plant. And the schools were designed by men who were designing assembly lines and factories in the midst of this industrial revolution. Men like Frederick Taylor, John Dewey, people concerned with ideas about efficiency and democracy in education and so on. The re-engineering of human society. And these were not Catholic ideas. The public school system was designed to serve a couple of unique circumstances. First of all, these were going to be public schools. They were going to have large numbers of students. They were going to be large, localized schools. Secondly, they were going to be tax funded. Money was not going to be an issue. There was not going to be a pressure to create a sustainable model of schooling because the funds were going to be provided through taxation. It was not a business plan. It was a government. It was a department of the government, a government service. It didn't need to be profitable. It didn't need to be sustainable. It was going to be funded by taxation. When we consider those two things, the fact that it assumed a large student body and artificial funding, we can understand why it's not appropriate to attempt to use that model in a private school setting. It's quite irrational. First of all, we're dealing with a small private student body. And second, it won't be tax funded, it will be tuition funded. So the parents are going to be asked to pay for the operation of this K-12 school model. And it's simply not sustainable. It's not sustainable. That's the first set of problems. We can say that the first set of problems with the K-12 school model for a private school is that it's simply not financially sustainable. But that's not even the biggest problem. If we were able to come up with some clever fundraising scheme, or if we were fortunate enough to serve a community that was wealthy and there were people in the area who had enough money to pay a significant tuition for their children to attend a local school. I taught here in Charlotte in a private school, a day school, where the tuition was $18,000 a year. There's a wealthy Christian community in the Charlotte area, and tuition could be provided for. But that's not the only problem. Even if you can come up with the money, there are other issues which I think are even more important because they transcend financial problems. The second problem with this K-12 school model is that the way that the school is set up, it depends on a large faculty. There's going to be a need for a large number of teachers. Just think, when you say K-12, you're talking about 13 different grade levels. Right off the bat, 13 grade levels. So even if there was just one class per grade level, there would be... So the second problem with the K-12 model is that when we say K-12, we're right off the bat talking about 13 grade levels. And as I was saying, if we had one class of students per grade level, we would need to have 13 teachers. And that's just a basic teacher per grade level. Then we start to think about the modern curriculum. We start to think about English language arts, we need English teachers. Science, we need a science teacher. Math, we need a math teacher. Multiple grade levels, multiple different subjects and levels of mathematics. And the faculty just grows more and more complex. Because, again, this K-12 model took it for granted that teachers and salaries would be provided for by taxation for a large number of students, which means a large number of tax-paying community members. It wasn't intended for private tuition. Now, we're going to need a large number of teachers. We're claiming that we're going to teach a classical Catholic curriculum, and we're going to find that there are no teachers available to teach any real classical curriculum. So who are these teachers going to be? A classical school, if it's truly classical, would be focused on the classical liberal arts. These subjects are not taught by common people off the streets. They're not taught by the Sunday school teachers at the local parish. These courses include Latin and Greek studies. They include history and philosophy. Where are these teachers going to come from? You're not going to walk around town and find a dozen teachers for real classical education. Teacher turnover, even at a good school, like the private school I worked at, teacher turnover was sometimes as high as 30% in a year. Every year we'd have faculty orientation a week or two before the school year started, and it seemed like half the people in the room were new teachers. And there'd be all kinds of problems through the year, as many of these teachers had their first teaching experience, got into all kinds of trouble in the midst of the year, and were replaced the following year by new teachers, and the cycle started all over again. Worse than that, the schools don't have their own curriculum, and so what happens is the curriculum is often left to the teachers. And it's assumed that the teachers are going to come in and prepare the daily lessons for the children. And so the entire instruction and academic program of the school becomes dependent on an unskilled, usually low-paid faculty that's going to turn over year by year. And just think through the practical implications of this reality, especially in a private school setting. The actual academic core, the content of the academic instruction, the assessment, the record keeping, and so on, the real core issues, what I would argue are the essential elements of a true school, are the last priority in many modern K-12 schools. It's just assumed that the teachers are going to take care of that. And all we have to do is find good teachers. Now, the problem with that is that when you do find a good teacher, it's very unlikely that they're going to stay for long. Because most good teachers are young, talented, bright individuals who are on an upward path. Maybe they just got out of college. They're looking for their first job out of college. They come out, they're bright, they're overqualified. They're going to be at your school temporarily as they get their legs under them after college and move into their life's work. The best teachers are not going to be around long. And you're going to know that from day one. So you're going to have the academic content of the school dependent on a constantly changing faculty that cannot possibly be paid well, that will not possibly be a highly competent classical teaching faculty. And what you see is that this really is not a sustainable plan for a school. Financially, there are great obstacles to overcome. But even if you overcome those financial obstacles and can find a way to pay the bills, you're still going to be hit with academic problems. You're going to have a hard time finding a quality faculty. You're going to have a hard time establishing a school curriculum. You're going to have a hard time leading students. It's nice to say first grade, second grade, third grade. Look at this nice progression of classes and studies. That sounds nice, but now factor in the teacher turnover, the changing curriculum content, changing assessment standards, on, and you see this myth of this systematic assembly line school program gets exposed when it actually has to work. The modern schools, and we're talking about public schools with billions of dollars available to them, they look great on paper. The websites look great. The curriculum maps look great. But those printed curriculum maps have very little to do with what any individual student in those schools is learning. And this is where the schools get away with this big charade that they play. They're allowed to sort these students into different levels, and they're allowed to grade the students. So, while the school, this public school, can publish this impressive looking curriculum guide, and it can go through all of the different competencies and skills and points of knowledge that are going to be covered in the curriculum over these years of study, this great scope and sequence, these core standards, or whatever the curriculum may be, it all looks wonderful on the website or in print. But now we actually walk into the school building and we ask, where is this education on paper actually being received? Where is it being taught? Where is it being assessed? And we find a giant mess. First of all, we have, let's just say, a 9th grade English language arts curriculum plan, all laid out. Students will be able to do this, students will do this, students will learn this, students will practice this. On and on, this organized document, chart of all of these curriculum objectives. Looks great. But now we look and find out that there are 4 different levels of students in 9th grade English. They are taught by 4 different teachers of varying ability and experience. All of these teachers make up their own lesson plans. All of these teachers make up their own assignments and assessments. All of these teachers have their own grading schemes. And this batch of, let's say, 200 students has almost an entirely different education from one classroom to the next. The orderly study plan that's available on the website has almost nothing to do with what any of these individual students is learning in class or doing. They've sorted the students into different levels. So maybe the honors students get what's on that paper, but the students in the level 3 class are barely getting anything done. And at each level, they're being graded from A through F. And if you get a D at any level, even the lowest level, you move on to the next grade, as if the curriculum objectives have been fulfilled. And this is just total baloney. If the public school, with all of that money, all of the facilities, all of the staff, can't accomplish this idea of the K-12 education, but relies on a smoke and mirrors system of levels and grades, how can you possibly imagine that any such system is possible in a private school lacking money with what's likely going to be an inferior faculty? And when I say inferior, I don't doubt that you can find nice people, usually ladies, to fill each classroom. But you're not going to find full-time, dedicated career teachers to work at the private school. That's very rare, even in the best schools. It's very rare. We often find that the teachers are the wives of the pastor, or the wives of a board member, the wives of another teacher, a retired father who is now working as a teacher to help the school because he retired from his contracting business, a retired military member who now, as a 65-year-old man, is going to teach science while he lives on his military retirement. You know, this is the makeup of a private school faculty. It's this hodgepodge of volunteers, half-paid people, professionals, and so on, and it just creates an unstable academic environment. And again, you can tell me that it's going to be different for you, But I'm going to challenge that and say that it's not going to be different. The K-12 model requires a large number of teachers. It's assumed that it's funded artificially through taxation. And not only that, but you're promising to offer some kind of a classical education. And are we going to talk about what that even means? Because classical education historically has a very specific meaning. It means that the children are going to study the classical liberal arts. They're going to study Latin and Greek, grammar, reasoning, rhetoric, the four arts of the quadrivium, classical philosophy. And we're going to assume that they're going to study Catholic theology, not to mention the humanities, studying history and literature. You're going to find teachers for all of these subjects, K through 12, in a privately funded school. The answer is no. You're not going to find those teachers. You're going to end up with what's equivalent to a Sunday school program with part-time teachers, volunteers, and a couple of overworked, competent teachers, which is the normal experience of a private school. That's what's going to happen. You're going to have these wonderful young ladies teaching elementary school levels who are in the process of getting married, having children, starting families. It's going to be a mess trying to have a K-12 faculty and have any kind of academic standards. If you just think through the practical workings of a K-12 private school, just think through the practical details. All of the different grade levels, all of the different faculty members, all of the diverse needs of the students in each of these grade levels, which are organized by the kids' birth dates and have almost nothing to do with their individual interests, abilities, and so on. If you think through the practical details, rather than the sort of immature glory of just having your own school, if you think through the practical details, you're going to run into a million different problems, because the K-12 school system was not designed for private education. So that's all my negative talk. And I'm not here to just tear down everything you're thinking and talking about to discourage you. I'm just telling you that planning to start a K-12 private school and throwing the word classical around is just not realistic. It may work to get a small number of families who don't know any better excited, but it's not a realistic plan. That's not what classical education is. That's not what historical Catholic education is. It's not going to work. And you can go ahead and try it on your own, but I ask you to come back and testify to whether or not what I told you doesn't happen. Because it's going to happen. Even if you overcome the financial hurdles, even if you're able to find a dozen decent people to teach, you're still going to have a mess with regard to curriculum. You're still going to have to deal with questions of instruction, teacher turnover, assessment records, curriculum mapping, on and on and on. And I'm just telling you from experience and from principle that it's not going to accomplish anything. It's just going to be another struggling private school whose chief mission, like most private schools, isn't about the education of the students. It's about its own self-preservation. You're going to be working just to keep the school going, just to keep the teachers paid. And like I said before, the last priority is going to be the actual individual academic experience of the students. That's all my negative talk. Now, let's talk positive. And this is where you have to be willing to think. You have to be willing to step out of the box. Stop trying to just have your own copy of what everyone else is doing. Not be the next guy to buy the gas station down the road and think it's going to be different now that you're in charge. We need to think outside the box. And I'm going to offer you some things to think about based on my experience in education, both as a curriculum researcher, publisher, teacher, founder, administrator, and so on. The first thing that you need to establish, the first thing is the school curriculum. The school curriculum needs to exist as the core of the school. The school curriculum is the mission of the school. If we think of the church, for example, and we were to ask, what is the core of the church? It's not the people. The core of the church is the gospel. There's a message, there's a history, there's a truth that's to be preached, a message of salvation that is the core of the church. The sacraments are based on this core message, the faith of the gospel. The sacramental life, the liturgy, the priesthood is based on this core mission. Go into the world and make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. That is the mission of the church, the core, the essential character of the church. Everything else flows from it. A school has to have a similar mission. The school's mission is not the mission of the church, and many schools screw up by trying to pretend that they're the church. We see schools, for example, advertising that they offer students the sacraments, or they have priests, or they're located at a monastery. This is true of colleges as well as schools. None of that has anything to do with the school. The school is not a counterfeit church. We don't need a school to provide us with sacraments. We don't need a school to provide us with the opportunity to go to Mass or pray the Rosary. We don't need a school to provide us with access to priests or the opportunity to get to know monks or walk around a monastery property. We need a school to fulfill an academic mission. And the curriculum is the plan or the mission, the academic mission of the school. And there has to be a curriculum established that actually establishes clear goals and provides for their fulfillment. If there's no such curriculum, and I'm not just talking about a list of books that you're going to buy for the students, that's not a curriculum. That's just a book list. That's a library. A curriculum is an actual plan for study, instruction, and assessment that can lead a student from where they are when they show up at your school to the point where you intend for them to leave your school. That plan is the responsibility of the headmaster of the school. Or we could go even higher and say that plan is the responsibility of the board that organizes and manages the school. If board members worked to establish a curriculum, every other position that needs to be filled in the school can be filled in light of that curriculum mission. The curriculum would run the school. The school would not be dependent on whoever happened to be working for the school in a given year. The school would have stability. The academic quality of the school would be guaranteed by the curriculum. The board members would know exactly what the headmaster and teachers are responsible to execute in the school, and everyone would be accountable to that curriculum. Parents could be told what the students are going to study, how it's going to be assessed. The teachers could be judged by whether or not they effectively promote and support the curriculum objectives, and the overall quality of the school could be established and maintained year by year, no matter what happens with faculty or other issues. The curriculum, which again is not just a list of books like some kind of homeschool curriculum, the curriculum is the plan of the academic program that's going to be offered by the school to the students and administered by the administrators and faculty members of that school. That academic plan has to be established as the core of the school. The question then is, what should that curriculum be, and where are you going to find that curriculum? This may sound like self-promotion, but I'm just going to tell you that I left the private school because I watched as the school I worked at, which was an elite private school, I watched as they struggled to pretend that they had a curriculum. I watched as they tried to get me to provide them with records that allowed them to appear to have a curriculum. They never had a curriculum. There were great teachers in the school who accomplished great things, and they were maybe 5 or 6 of the teachers that were responsible for 80% of the school's achievements. The rest of the faculty were just turnover staff members that came and went and just had to hold things down year by year. And as I watched how the school actually worked, I said to myself, this is just a cover-up. This is a business. This private school is a business providing lots of people with salaries. But actually, if you poke through this facade of fundraising and all of these administrative activities and get to the real core of academic content, you find that there's nothing there. The bag is empty. And I knew that for there to be a strong school that wouldn't have the problems that even this great school had, if there was to be a great school that restored excellence in Christian learning, it was going to have to be based on an excellent curriculum. And the curriculum would have to be complete without any faculty or staff being depended upon for its existence or articulation. And so what I did was I started working to research and restore the classical liberal arts curriculum, to make it to be the foundation of future Christian schools. And I spent 20 years doing this work, researching, going back, like I said, before the public schools were invented, before tax-funded schools developed, going back to schools that existed that were not public schools, that were private schools, often that were run as charity schools and staffed by religious communities, to see what they did, how they organized the schools, what they taught, and so on. And then once I found out what they taught, I sought to research and dig up the resources that they used, and then learn how they taught those subjects, how they used those resources. And I've spent the last 25 years actually, assembling and organizing and working with all of these resources in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, which I founded formally in 2008. What the Classical Liberal Arts Academy makes available to any school is that core curriculum, which exists outside of the faculty, outside of any school employees, that the board members or founding members of the school can simply point to and say, this is our curriculum. This is our course of studies. This is our academic standard. These are our methods of assessment. These are our records. This is the academic core of our school. The Classical Liberal Arts Academy can provide that for a private school externally. The benefit of that is that once that academic core is established, the school is no longer pressed to find academic experts, which, again, they're not going to find. You're not going to find an army of classical educators. You can find this fake Dorothy Sayers nonsense talking about levels of learning, which is basically homeschool type stuff, design your own curriculum, brought into private schooling where people just make stuff up. But if you want real classical Catholic education, we provide it in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and schools can use our program as their curriculum. A very simple decision, a decision that you can budget affordably, and then simply find people to administer. And those people can come and go, and it has no effect on the academic quality of your school program. Now, let's set the curriculum aside, because as I said, there's an easy solution for the curriculum, which is the most important part of the school. But now let's consider the question, what is a school? What is a school? It's not an academic center. In 2021, no one is dependent upon a school for learning, for academic content. Everything that's available to a school is available online today. No one is dependent on the school for learning. No one is dependent on the school library for access to study materials or resources. There's more content on Google Books or archive.org than in any school library. No one is going to school to learn stuff or to gain access to information. This is the information age. The information is online. That's not what school is for. In 1950, that is what school was for. The library, even when I was a kid in the 1980s, the school library was where the books were, the encyclopedias, the research resources, the microfilms, etc. That was in the school library. You had to go use the card catalog to find the books, and you could use those resources to write your research papers, and so on. That is no longer true. No one needs to go to school for information or resources. That should not be a part of a school's mission, to act as some kind of community center for information. That's obsolete thinking. That is provided to everyone in the comfort of their own home on the internet. The school is not a source of information or learning center. What is a school? What is a school? As I said before, the primary responsibility of a brick and mortar school in 2021 is childcare. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just a fact. The school is a place where children can go and parents can send the children there knowing that they're going to do good things at the school. They can choose a school that is going to promote their own religious beliefs, as they should. They're going to send them to a school that's going to take care of their academic requirements. They're going to send them to a school where they can be with decent kids from other like-minded families and make some good friends. That's what school is for. It's not a learning center. It's not an information center. It's a cultural center that cares for children. That's what the school is for. It's a cultural center that cares for children in a community. The curriculum can be outsourced. As I said, that's a simple decision. That's the least of a school's problems. The real burden of a school is to create a cultural center and to focus on the culture that's provided, that's created and provided for the students and the faculty members. And that's what school boards and school founders should be asking. What culture needs to be established? Because that ultimately is what the school needs to provide, the culture. It could mean having a certain daily schedule that all of the students participate in, that has scheduled time for prayer, scheduled time for sacraments, scheduled time for study, scheduled time for tutoring, scheduled time for choir, scheduled time for sports, scheduled time for other kinds of activities, extracurricular activities. It's a cultural center. That's what the school is for. And its primary practical work is childcare. Trying to provide the best childcare possible that satisfies a number of needs: spiritual needs, sacramental needs, academic needs, cultural needs, and so on. A cultural center. It doesn't need a faculty of academics. It doesn't need a faculty of wannabe instructors or teachers who want to draw the children to themselves as if they're some kind of gurus. The school doesn't need that, and it's not sustainable to try and seek and provide that. The school is not going to find an army of wise men to teach the classes. That's not necessary because the curriculum can take care of that. Students need help with things like motivation, discipline, organization, structure, counseling, discipline, supervision as they participate in different activities, and so on. That's the real work of a school in 2021. It's an academic, cultural childcare center. That's the real work of the people on site at the school. That's the purpose of the facility that's used for the school. We don't need lecture halls. We don't need classrooms. We don't need libraries full of books. Those things are not essential to a 21st century school. What we do need for a 21st century school would be a chapel, study halls, computer labs where students can have access to computers or just laptops that they can use on tables, places for tutoring, places for extracurricular activities, and so on. That's what's needed in a school. No fancy facilities, no lecture halls, no formal classrooms. Those things are outdated and really don't make any sense. Again, millions of kids are being homeschooled. The school doesn't have to pretend that this is 1980 and we need lecture halls and classrooms. There are kids being homeschooled and admitted to the best universities in the world. Schools don't need to fake this idea that they are the source of information and learning. Teachers should not be pretending that they are the actual sources of the learning. It's not true. And it's going to be unsustainable if you do that. So what school founders or founding board members need to be asking is, what is the culture that we want to provide for students and families and staff members who are going to be participating in this school community? It's much more open for volunteering and participation because everyone's different professions, knowledge, skills have a place because the school's a cultural center. The school I taught at in New Jersey, there were a lot of men, fathers in the school community who were self-employed or who owned construction and craftsman type businesses, and they were all involved in the school. And they would bring all of their different professions into the school for all kinds of activities. That's what the school offered. The school offered culture to the children. It was a cultural center. These were devout Christian men who were professionals in all different fields who came and shared their professions within the context of Christian life to the kids and allowed these kids to see what professional Catholic men look like, act like, talk like, and so on. It was a culture that was provided to the students. The academics at that time was handled by just a few men. But what the school offered was a culture. They had a great choir. They had sports teams. It was a great culture. They worked to teach kids study skills. They taught kids how to study, how to manage their time, and so on. It was a culture that was taught through the school to the students. The kids made great friends because you had a bunch of great families gathered together in this school, and the kids were able to become friends. They could go to each other's houses. The parents knew that the other parents were like-minded. It was a culture, a cultural center that cared for the children. And that's really what makes or breaks a school. The school does not need to hire an army of quote-unquote teachers because teaching is not going to be necessary. This is the 21st century. We don't need to find people on the street to teach in classrooms. That's not necessary. We can provide a curriculum that comes with lessons and assessments already prepared, support directly from expert teachers. There's no need to find these people locally because you're not going to. And it's going to bring down the quality of your school. So, outsourcing the curriculum, outsourcing the academic content, outsourcing assessment, outsourcing record keeping, and creating a stable, unchanging core of a school community is step one. The Classical Liberal Arts Academy can provide that for a private school that wants to offer a true classical Catholic education. Outside of that core come all of the questions of the school's actual practical execution. The academics will largely be provided for, and that's really the source of the culture that will develop in the school. All the kids will have the same experience. The older students will have done what the younger students have to do. You'll have tutors built into the school because every student will be able to turn around and help a younger student because he's done that lesson, taken that test, completed that assignment, and so on. It's not this mystery system locked up and kept away from the students by teachers. It's all open. The curriculum is known. Every student has been through what the younger students are going through. You have tutors right in the school community. The kind of people who are needed to make a school effective are the best role models, living models of the culture that the school exists to promote and pass on to the students. Cultural leaders, cultural role models. Those are the kind of people that the school needs, and those people can be part-time workers, volunteers, and so on, because that's the kind of people that the culture depends on. We don't need to have those people try and fulfill the roles of teachers and provide academic content and assessment and all of that stuff in the school, which they can't do. But they can come and just be good Catholic community members that motivate the kids, that support the kids, encourage the kids, set good example for the kids, and bring the kids benefits, cultural benefits that the school exists to provide. As far as the academic work, it's really a matter of just helping the students to study. The curriculum, because it's database driven, it's all pre-prepared, all of the courses are self-paced. The students can work at their own individual pace through the subjects. They're not going to get grades. Every student should have perfect scores because they're just going to study at their own pace and master each lesson. What they need is help. They need help of a daily schedule. They need help of accountability, tutoring and supervision just to help them get their daily tasks done. They don't need lecturers. They don't need critics and judges of their work who are subjective. They just need help. And the teachers themselves, the volunteers or staff members who want to help the kids can just study right along with the kids, studying the same content, taking the same assessments, learning what's necessary for success, and so on. So it's a different model for schools. It's a sustainable model. It's a realistic plan for a private Catholic school. And it's feasible. It's really feasible. You don't have to have a tribe of millionaires coming together to start a school. You don't have to create some high tuition country club environment that only the economically elite can afford to participate in. It can be a real Catholic school community, but you have to be willing to step outside the box of this modern K-12 school model and learn to think and work differently in the 21st century, taking advantage of the technological resources that we have available today and moving away from those unsustainable practices that are now obsolete. These are the things that are causing private schools to fail and shut down. And rather than just rebranding the same problems and starting all over again, you can create a school that actually eliminates those flaws and replaces them with smarter, more effective, more sustainable solutions. As I said, we can help you with this in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and we'll work with you to work out plans for how to set things up and how to get started. You can scale up as you go, develop phase by phase. I know all the real life challenges you face developing just piece by piece, grade by grade, as your first students start to come together or as the school begins to grow. All of that scaling and development and customization is no problem because we've already created the curriculum that's designed to serve individual students, and they can all work at their own pace, and there's no pressure on the school to try to keep everything together artificially, which is another problem that I didn't even talk about. But I hoped in this talk to just get your thoughts rolling in the right direction. There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot of practical, real-world challenges to talk through. There's unique circumstances that are going to be true for your school community, the people that you have access to, the people available to help you, different financial resources, different access to facilities and things like that. Some groups have access to a church and they have a priest or bishop who's on board and wanting to help, and they've got facilities, but they've got no faculty. Other groups have faculty and no facilities. Other groups have large numbers of students. They're looking for some of the students to be hybrid, homeschool. They want homeschool kids to participate part-time, and it gets very complicated as you try to make these situations work in real life. What most schools unfortunately do, because they don't have a solution, is just serve the common denominator and water the whole thing down until they have a program that's so basic that anyone can participate in it, and there's no need to do that. There's no need to do that. We can provide an elite academic program to serve the strongest and best students and allow them to study alongside weaker, slower students and just mind their own business as it comes to academics. But they can participate together in other school activities, like sports or choir or other activity groups that the school organizes. So you can have the benefits of classmates organized and grouped together by their ages and maturity and interests, but they can be allowed to work individually in their academics. And that's what you're going to see is the real key to allowing these school communities to provide the flexibility and scalability that you're going to need to establish a private school, make it sustainable, and allow it to grow. So, as I said, I was hoping in this talk just to get your wheels turning, just to get you thinking, to raise issues. I'm sure as you listen to this, you're starting to think of all kinds of practical issues you'd like to talk about, and that's what I'm looking forward to. That should be the next phase of our communication. Rather than respond to all these calls and emails individually, I'd like to just make this one talk and put it out there so that these groups looking to start schools, looking to start real classical schools, not this fake stuff, but the real thing, really restore Christian education, can do so and can know how to go about it. What's also cool about starting with a talk like this is that these different groups will be listening and hearing the same things, and they can even start to talk to each other and get in touch. So maybe we can organize that in the future where we can bounce ideas off different groups, or as I see different groups successfully get moving, I can share what they're doing with other groups and help them to learn from one another. But the work of restoring Christian education is in front of us. I think we have real, sustainable ways to get this done. It's just a matter of getting our minds right, getting our plans right, making things sustainable, and not simply rebranding the same old problems, but understanding what they are, knowing exactly what the causes of school failure have been, and creating new schools that eliminate those causes of trouble and replace them with successful, effective, sustainable solutions that actually can allow Catholic schools to develop as cultural centers in the 21st century. So let's get these discussions started and we'll move on. And if I can think of topics that will be helpful for everyone, I'll continue to publish talks on these issues or just deal with them individually. I hope that's helpful. God bless you all.